This is a map of my campaign world. This is a big spreadsheet I use to track all the campaigns I've run in that campaign world. This is that spreadsheet spread out over a course of a timeline to show what year each campaign took place in. As you can see, the spreadsheet is very big. The map of the campaign world is very big. I've been running in this setting for about 9 years. I've been DMing for about 10, and all of these settings and adventures and campaigns all influence each other, and they all connect in some way, sometimes just by virtue of being in the same world, but sometimes because they directly share NPCs, plot points, magic items, factions, or whatever else. Welcome to Daði's Diary. Here I talk about the campaigns I run, how I run them, and why they are the way they are. This is a series where I'll delve into the adventures and sessions I ran in the past couple of weeks. But before we get into a more of a play-by-play breakdown of what it is I'm doing at the moment, I kind of need to give you some background on my setting, my world, and my ongoing campaigns. This is the first of these videos where I briefly touch on every single campaign that has ever happened in Oruson. And since there's, depending on how you count, somewhere between 90 to 70 of them, this is going to be a long video, even though we're only talking about each adventure very briefly. Campaigns in my setting can be broadly divided into phases. It's a lot like the Marvel Cinematic Universe in that way. I think of it as being in 4 phases. Number 1, phase 1, is the beginning. It is the first some adventures I ran in this setting when I was still trying to figure out how it was all going to work. Phase 2 is the rocky middle part where this stable world we were living in was slowly devolving into chaos. Phase 3 is the last war, or the Great War. It's this multi-planar across not just the mundane world, but all the planes of my setting. They were all fighting each other in basically 2 sides. The ones who were with the Overlord and allied against the Overlord. The Overlord being the main villain of MCDM Productions is Ajax. It's my own sort of fork of that character. Shares some iconography, some language, but also is kind of, at this point, my own. To my players, at least. Although I think anybody watching these videos would go, "Man, you stole that." And correct. I think good DMs should steal. Phase 4 is the newest arc of this campaign world, and it is kind of the aftermath of the Great War, how everything shook out from afterwards. It also includes playing in more time periods and sort of fleshing out various bits across the world. The first 3 phases were all played roughly chronologically over about as many years in-game as they were out-of-game. Let's start with phase 1. I consider phase 1 to be these adventures here. There's about 11 of them, but before we really talk about them, we need to talk about this sort of precursor to the campaign setting. This was a campaign I ran in Pathfinder. It was called Kingmaker at the time. We were inspired by the Kingmaker adventure path, but it wasn't really that adventure path. It was our own just sort of ideas of what kingmaking should be like. I think we used the domain rules, the kingdom rules in Pathfinder, but we didn't use their storyline. And it was set in Atraxia, which is this big continent here. This is the first part of my setting I ever drew up. I made a map of these islands here. It didn't include these islands here at the bottom or any of this stuff, and just a little corner here of the West Marches. It was a square map, and the adventure started down here in Tradia. I believe we still have Razul's Rest, which is where that adventure started. They ruined a town called Shipton. This used to be a town. It's now gone. Like, over the course of the adventure, they sort of started out this kingdom in Tradia and then would eventually go conquering and doing adventures in the rest of this region. And it was all fairly sort of hack and slash and beer and pretzels, but we had a lot of fun. And this turned out to be a huge history or huge part of the campaign world going forward. Afterwards, and somewhat at the same time, I ran a couple of West Marches games. I made a continent specifically for it, and I put it there. At this point, the campaign map still looked roughly like this. Those West Marches games were very much in the style of people making posts, asking questions, and then scheduling the game. Very little about that campaign ended up having an effect going forward. I played a couple of sessions where everyone played goblins. I ran Night Below. This is the first time I started expanding my campaign map. I sort of zoomed out and drew a bunch of blobs everywhere, and they weren't detailed or anything like this. They were just some vague shapes, and I said Night Below happens here, Heronshire. If you've ever read Night Below, you'll recognize the towns that we got on the map here. We got Milbourne and Palfrey Keep and Thurmaster and Harleton and so on. I've added a couple. In that adventure, they went into the Underdark. They discovered there were mind flayers and aboleth and all the kind of things that you fight in the Underdark, and it was a lot of fun. It was my first experience running 5th edition. I think I ran like 3 TPKs right off the start. But other than that, it was a blast. My friend Gabriel ran an adventure in this setting called Giants in the North. It features giants in northern Ariston. We tried for a little bit to run a different West Marches campaign with a whole bunch of planes collapsing in on each other. We only played one session, didn't go anywhere. These two adventures were 2 different times I ran Phandelver. In both instances, I ran them in my own sort of outback fantasy land. And we've got Verlaine, Norlane. This is sort of that Matt Colville sandbox style. He made a video on this. I literally took his ideas and his the way he presented these pre-written adventures. I put them on a map together, and I decided to run a bunch of adventures in there. It was a lot of fun. And then I ran the first of what I consider to be Kingmaker 2.0, which was sort of a sequel from Interregnum set 100 years later. And this campaign ended up featuring a character from Atraxia who went to Brightwell into South Beach and was trying to set up a new sort of domain there. And eventually different players sort of got added into that campaign. We played sort of classic low-level adventures going from town to town, solving problems. And I don't think it was clear to any of us that these adventures so far all happened in the same campaign setting. Like, they all theoretically did, but it didn't really matter at that point. While I was running Legacy, I was running a different adventure called the Casterian Isles, where I took the group I ran, Phandelver, and I put them up here into my sort of fantasy Viking land. And we played basically a version of Storm King's Thunder. It had some elements from the start, and then about halfway through, I just sort of pivoted into my own homebrew content. I do that a lot when I run pre-written modules. I'll run the start ad hoc, and then as written, and then I'll sort of start changing and developing and whatever. And by the time we get to the end, it's nothing like the end of the actual adventure. And in the Casterian Isles, one of the players found a sword, and it turned out to be a Tooth of the Dragon, which was another one of those ideas I stole from Matt Colville. I think he stole it from Jim Murphy, and it was the idea that there were these elven swords. I added the mythology that they were used to kill Tiamat, and one of these characters finds these swords, and in a different adventure I was running at the same time, Red Hand of Doom, which was for the group that was playing Kingmaker. They were on break, so I ran them through an adventure in Astarion, which is sort of my fantasy Asia. Up here in the Elser Vale, I ran Red Hand of Doom, and I sort of renamed most of the places, but kept Elser and Witchwood Keep, Prasanna, Witchwood, Thornwaste, Ruins of the Ghost Lord. But the rest is all sort of vaguely Asia-sounding to me, a white guy who doesn't know anything about any of these things, and my table of Icelandic white players who wouldn't know if I was committing some kind of terrible faux pas. And they found a Tooth of the Dragon too. And it's at this point that the two groups are starting to realize that this is all the same campaign setting. It hadn't been a secret. I'd been calling it Orathon and stuff like that, but the idea that there would ever be any crossover was brand new at that point. It was very exciting. And that was kind of the end of Phase 1. So far, we'd run a bunch of adventures all over the place, and it hadn't really been any sort of crazy interconnectivity other than the fact that Atraxia had been sending people into this one other place, and then we'd been playing these sort of various adventuring parties going around doing stuff. And then Kingmaker continues. Kingmaker War for Andrum is basically another chapter in Kingmaker 2.0. You can see the first one is levels 1 through 5, the next one is 5 through 8. And in War for Andrum, the conflicts in South Beach, the domain stuff that's been going on there, we're doing some mass combats and stuff like that, that had sort of started to spill over into the rest of Andria, into Wodenshire, Crowshire, Andrewshire, all over here, and Drukon had been pulled in, and Strahd and Ravenloft was beginning to be a bit of a problem. And that adventure sort of continued to escalate until at Castle Andrum there is a siege 3 ways, and nobody's willing to move, nobody's willing to do anything, and the war gets deadlocked. And the siege is going to go on for like 18 months, and nobody knows how it's going to end. And that was War for Andrum, and it was a lot of fun because a couple of new players joined, a couple of characters died, so the people who had characters at that point made new ones. And then by the time we get to Deadlocked War, things were starting to fall apart at the seams. That group was failing, but we'll get to there in a second. In the interim, we ran a bunch of adventures. I ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist, which completely collapsed, and we'll do a Game Tales story on that, where it's going to be me and Magnus and Ivar probably sitting down and talking about how badly it got screwed over. We ran a one-shot where we introduced a mercenary company called the Iron Circle. They went to Narak Dul, which is an orc island down here, and they were hired by one of the Kingmakers, Lazarus, who was the governor of Sandpoint, this town out here, which I think is from Pathfinder. I think it's from one of the big adventure paths they did. We just put that in. That's how I tend to world build. I'll see a cool thing, I'm like, bam, put it in here. Don't worry about it. And they had to go deal with these orcs, so it was a one-shot where they got to fight the orcs because they hired a mercenary company, and I figured let's make an adventure out of it. If the players hire a mercenary company, let's just let them play the mercenary company. Why not? Magnus and I then ran the Withering, which was our sort of version of the Tomb of Annihilation. It was set several hundred years in the past. In fact, if we look at sort of the adventures that we've been playing through, they're all here in the early, Legacy, they're all here sort of in the same cluster of about, a couple of decades. But the Withering is, 500 years earlier, during the Age of Peace. And Acererak does this thing with the Soulmonger and starts eating souls, and we run that adventure. We basically run it as is, except for the fact that we put... We replaced the wizard in that story with Mordenkainen, and we decided that Mordenkainen and Acererak have this sort of constant, eternal enmity. I wrote a short story about Acererak, and in it I revealed that Acererak was actually a character named Fellhorn, who had appeared and been one of the player characters in Interregnum. Player Gabriel ran him, and he's sort of had a long-lasting effect there as a Acererak ever since, which is a great thing you can do. You can sort of take characters and make them be villains, or you can mix and match pre-written characters and player characters, and blend them together and, present that to the players and see how they take it. That's a lot of fun. I ran the first session in Ghost of Saltmarsh. I don't remember where I said it, and it ended up not really mattering. I ran a one-shot where a bunch of kobolds tried to save their god. They realized that they didn't have an actual god, and they got really upset about it, so they tried to make sure that they got a god. And they ended up creating a god by finding a bunch of Kuatoa and having the Kuatoa pray to this imagined kobold god, and now there is a kobold god in my world. I ran a cowboy adventure set all the way back in Atraxia in the Westwood, and there was a train robbery and a whole bunch of stuff. It was good fun. We all went to a cabin, we drank whiskey, put on fake mustaches and cowboy hats, and we said, yeah! And it was great. We ended up doing it several more times, just going back to the Westwood. And at this point, it's becoming clear to us that we're all running the same campaign setting, and it's got these sort of connecting links, and it's gotten to be really fun. Magnus ran an adventure called Madness in Freeport, which is here, Freeport. It's from Green Ronin. It's a city that we have a lot of affection for, and we've been playing for a while. We put him on this island, and this island belongs to the Atraxian Empire at this point, and it's sort of he sort of made it noir, almost Cthulhu-esque. We got a huge kick out of it, but it kind of collapsed, and we didn't manage to finish, so it gets an F. At this point, by the way, I haven't mentioned the fact that I've been grading these adventures on whether or not they got finished and how fun they were. An A being really good and quite rare. Most of these adventures are sort of B. C is we finished it and it was fine. And D is, we didn't really have to do this. And F is did not finish. An adventure fails if we don't finish it. So as soon as I started making it a goal, I called unfinished campaigns failed campaigns. What I ended up doing is I ended up speeding up adventures a lot. So we got to the second half and players were getting burned out, the story wasn't progressing. Just sped them up, make the adventures faster. It was a lot of fun. Then I ran Curse of Strahd, and that completely collapsed. It's some of the worst experience I've had ever running a pre-written campaign, and I will do a Game Tales on that with Ivan and Magnus, and that one might also be coming out soon. Halfway through Phase 2 now, we're going to talk about the Deadlocked War. At this point, the group that we were playing with sort of collapsed. The players had kind of lost interest in the way I wanted to run the game, and I'd kind of lost interest in running for them. And what had happened is that I'd been running all these adventures with other people, and they had a play style similar to what I wanted. And the players that I had been running this Kingmaker stuff with had not really been interested in the sort of slower pace or extensive roleplay or any of these things. They mostly wanted to roll dice and kill stuff, and I wasn't there. I wasn't into it, and they weren't into what I was doing. So we just sort of were growing apart. And at this point during Deadlocked War, the group splintered. I used this as an opportunity to run sort of segmented adventures across the world, the old world, Brightwell, we had the group of characters also splinter and do different quests. And that was good fun. But in the end, it didn't feel like the same campaign, so we figured we'd had to go change something as the group just completely collapsed. They went to do a quest in Karasaki, which is here in Astarion, in Shinkai, and they did a quest in Razamal. So it's sort of Fantasy Asia and Fantasy Egypt, and this was my opportunity to kind of introduce those places. We'd played a little bit in the Ulster Vale, but we hadn't played in Shinkai, and we'd never been to the Arid, so I wanted to introduce both of those elements. And in the Deadlocked War adventure in the Arid, they failed to defeat the bad guy who was going to summon the Babig, And the Black Pharaoh, Nephrin Ka, which I think I stole from Cthulhu mythos, or maybe it's an actual pharaoh, I don't know, showed up and killed the whole party except for like 2 player characters who managed to make their escape. And it was legendary, and as a result, the Arid was now cast into this sort of chaos. And this is when we really started to see the power of the connective world. I'd run this mini adventure, which was going to be a few sessions, and at the end of it, they were going to fight a big boss. And because they failed, the adventure became more interesting. And suddenly we realized that every adventure could have a win-lose condition. And the lose condition didn't have to be the world ended. It could be this bad thing happens in this one region. And when that happens, because we're always playing in the same world, every adventure really matters, right? Continuing right on, we ran another Iron Circle adventure. You see, I wrote a prose for it. This is what I used to do. I used to write little short stories and send them to players and be like, hey, do you want to play? And that worked. 10 out of 10. That every time it worked. Allies and Alloy, I wanted to introduce my multiverse. I'd never run in it. So I thought, I'm going to run in my Plane of Fire. I'm going to run in Alloy, right? The City of Brass. And they're going to meet Azer and the Lady of Brass, which I think is a Matt Colville character, but in my world, she was the wife of the Emperor who got created during the Interregnum. The Kingmaker Interregnum created the Atroxian Empire. Forgot to mention that earlier. At the end of that adventure, they create this empire, and he drew a card from the deck of many cards, deck of many things, and it was like you get like an extra planar ally, or you find love, or it was something like that. So I had like a genie show up, and it wasn't that kind of game where we really went into it, but I was like, yeah, she loves you, she's amazing. And then we later on got to develop that character a little bit during the Allies and Alloy adventure. I ran an adventure, Nerds in Northmont. I ran this was set down here, and this is like a wizard school. It was a one-shot. It was a lot of fun. It was like a Harry Potter pastiche. Pirates of the Mid-Sea, we ran a pirate adventure here, and this is the Mid-Sea. And they went to Savrosa, and they went into some bays over here and found like a little island chain down here. And we discovered that the Atroxian Empire, was waging a war on piracy. And we got introduced to a character called Trevor Rosenthal, who was the Grand Admiral, and he had this big ship, the Indomitable, basically like Cutler Beckett from Pirates of the Caribbean. And they didn't kill him. He lived, and that's going to have huge ramifications. I ran the Rockma one-shot. I just ran it as is. It's set in Oruson somewhere. I ran Baldur's Gate Descent to Avernus, and it's set here in Mythal, which is a city in my world, which now, because of that adventure, looks a lot like Baldur's Gate. And they went into Hell, and we got introduced to Hell politics, to Asmodeus and Mephistopheles, and one of the players at the end of that adventure she replaced Serial, and is now a Duke of Hell. I ran Dungeon of the Mad Mage. This is in COVID. This needs to go further down. This is all COVID here. Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I just gotten on Roll20. I bought the adventure online, and they had set it up with like lighting and stuff, and it was really cool. And we only got a few sessions in before I introduced the Goblin Town in the middle of that second level, or the start of the second level. And one of my players was like, "Oh, a bunch of goblins, great, we'll kill them all." And I went, "Oh God, they're gonna kill everything in this dungeon. Even the stuff they don't have to. Even the stuff that is explicitly there to help them. They're gonna kill everything. I'm not gonna have fun." So I canceled it. And ever since, I've wanted to run a mega dungeon, and I'm gonna sometime soon. But that didn't go anywhere. Almost done with phase 2, which is like halfway there. Grove Treaders was a series of one-shots I've run to introduce specific people to D&D. They're like, hey Daði, what you know a lot about this Dungeons and Dragons stuff. How does it work? And I'm like, here, I'll run it for you, and I'll just set it in Rend, because the lord of that place is Shavar Grove Treader, and he has an organization called the Grove Treaders, and they go and tread the groves to go find monsters and stuff. And I'll just run adventures in here all the time. Less now, but back when I was meeting people who didn't know anything about D&D a lot, I would just introduce them to that. And then I ran Saviors of the Multiverse, which was awesome. What we did is, we figured, we sort of wanted to run one-shot adventures. So I'd post on Discord a picture like this of art I'd found online, and I'd tell my players, hey, 6 slots available, we're playing every Friday, go pick one of these characters. We're going to do 5 sessions on 5 Fridays, go pick one of these characters. And they wouldn't get to see the character sheet or anything, they'd just look at a picture and be like, I want to be this guy. Great! And then we'd hand them the sheet. And a lot of the times we'd sort of homebrewed the characters so that, they had unique abilities. Reginald, the Royal Admiral, who's a GIF, he was the first time we made a warlord. I told Magnus, I was like, I think this guy's a warlord. And he was like, okay, let's figure out what that means. So we did a bunch of work on it. Dash was like a fighter, but he also had some rogue abilities, and he could spend like plot points to progress the plot. Diva, I think, was like a mystic. Welcome to the Mystic Arts. And it was a lot of text. I was going to say it's a lot of fun. I don't know that the mystic was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of text. And Veridon was a summoner, which we're still developing right now, but it was our first sort of work on that. And this was great. This is a great way to do a one-shot quick. In that adventure, the Earth was in danger. Like the plane that our universe exists within, inside the multiverse, and our universe was in danger. And the bad guy was going to try and have a big worm eat it. And the players couldn't stop him. So the worm ate the Earth, and Earth doesn't exist in my campaign world anymore. It got destroyed in the 90s because Dash was a human from Earth. He was a football player, like in the movie, Flash Gordon. And it got destroyed. I think in the 90s rather than the 80s. I think cell phones were a thing. Then there was another Iron Circle adventure. I wrote another short story set in Freeport, and then they went to Anarchy and Atroxia. And at this point, they go back into Atroxia. And we've played a little bit of Cowboys, but we hadn't been back to Blackguard ever. Like, the adventure that took place in Atroxia never really spent any time in Blackguard. And or on Ariston, they didn't spend a lot of time on Ariston. And also we just were playing very Beer and Pretzel-y, so this time they were going to Blackguard and then came to Atroxia. And it was, suddenly I had to go figure out what Blackguard was. Because my style had matured in a certain way, so we had to sort of go figure a bunch of stuff out. And it was a lot of fun because I had an opportunity to kind of retcon it, but also not throw anything out. I just added stuff. I just added, and it got really big and intricate and beautiful. And we ran this adventure. I ran this adventure, Anakin and Troxia. Some of these I'm running with, like the Savior and the Multiverse, I ran with Magnus, and so did the Pirates. But this one I ran alone. I ran for the Iron Circle. And in it, the Overlord attacks the Atroxian Empire during the last war. And there's cities floating in the sky, and there's a bunch of crap going on, and death and destruction, and it's sort of like Pearl Harbor, because the Overlord has been fighting a bunch of wars all over the place, but Atroxia has been staying out of it. And then the Battle of Blackguard happens, and now Atroxia has to get involved in the war. And again, it's another one of those moments where we see just how connected the whole world is. Allies and Alloy featured the Overlord as well. Rise and Descent, completely forgot to mention. There's so much, like when I'm going through this, I'm glossing over huge chunks of detail. Rise and Descent, the reason that adventure existed is because Lazarus died in the War for Androm. And I ran a solo session where he met the Raven Queen. The Raven Queen said, if you do me a favor, I could send you right back. And he said no. He said, fuck you. I'm not doing that. He didn't say fuck you, but he said I'm not doing that. So she sent him to hell as punishment to try and like soften him up, but it didn't work. He did a whole adventure in hell instead. I sent him to hell, and then they just released that book, and Magnus looked at me like, I guess you're running that book. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I am. So that adventure was a whole bunch of new characters, and his character, and a character who played Fandelver in this one-shot over here. I don't remember any other character from that one-shot, but I remember Tholomew. So that's what the adventure's named after now, because this was put in the spreadsheet retroactively. And he died. I killed Tholomew in his opening scene. Very rude of me. And Lazarus had died before, and then a bunch of new characters showed up. And then these new characters played the Baldur's Gate section, and when they came to Hell, they met these characters, who were higher level. And these guys would catch up over the course of the adventure until they both started leveling together. And same with Mr. Ravenloft. The reason they were going into Ravenloft is because Strahd was one of the sides that was sieging Castle Androm, and the war wouldn't break until Strahd died. So they hired some folks to go kill Strahd, and then Mr. Ravenloft was them playing the characters who were hired to kill Strahd. In Anarchy and Atroxia, it ends by this one guy who was a politician who said the Overlord would attack, and everyone ignored him. It ends by that guy, Wallace Credge, being in charge. And Wallace Credge goes and makes it his policy to go wage war with the Overlord. And now the last war begins, and we enter Phase 3, which is the longest phase so far. And a lot of this I'll be able to gloss over, but some of it we're going to have to spend some time on. For instance, Perfect Storm, the Southern Isles. This area here, hang on, I'm blocking it. Oh, this area here is the Southern Isles. And it wasn't this detailed when they first went here. They started in Port Royal, and they got a ship and a map that was basically just a bunch of blobs, empty blobs. And I told them, Magnus and I were running this adventure. We told them, if you sail around, you can make a map. And you're being asked to make a map. And they got a whole bunch of quests here. They meet Rosenthal, the guy who the pirates were fighting. And he's basically trying to conquer this place. Because he's like, this place is full of resources. And we need to go fight the Invincible Overlord. We need to conquer these resources so we own them. So we can go fight the Overlord. But in response to him doing that, him and this other guy, Lionel Krauser, the two of them are sort of doing a bunch of colonialism, basically. In response to the two of them doing that, the Lion Men on Lenore, the Lenore, they go conquering their neighbors. The Halflings in Goldfeld and the Minotaurs in Barta. And then they go conquer the Loxen on Loxen to the south. And they go conquer the Cyclops on Black Isle. And they start doing a bunch of warmongering because they need to build up their resources to fight against the Atroxians, right? And the players are sailing through on a sailing ship with a map, and they're doing, basically, it's the Enterprise. It's the USS Enterprise going on islands and discovering brave new worlds. They discovered that there were these turtlemen that were keeping the peace. And it was amazing. We played a lot of it online, and it actually kind of worked. It's the first time I remember being, in love with an online campaign. We had cameras on. That helped a lot. And we did a bunch of... They had, spreadsheets for how to run the ship and stuff. And they got a bunch of quests. This is a huge sandbox, and the one thing I learned about running a sandbox this big was just give your players a bunch of quests. Just a crap ton. More than they can deal with. And then just have them run out. Have them expire. Oh, you didn't do this one? Some other adventuring party did. What adventuring party? Introduce different, introduce rivals. You put things on the board, you take them off the board, and you just sort of stack them up. You get a quest from some halfling over here, but then he gets killed by the Lionmen in the war. Quest expired. And they're doing quests, and they're losing quests, and they're starting new quests, and it just feels like they can do anything. It's awesome. Then we did Deck of Many Characters, which was, at some point I realized the NPC section on D&D Beyond for me had 52 characters in it that somebody had played and then put into that folder. So 52 previously played player characters in this campaign setting existed. And I figured, well, we map them onto a deck of cards, bunch of kobolds, Morton Kanan from Withering, everything in between. We draw cards, we do Battle Royale. It was a lot of fun. We've done it several times since. There's a video on the Mythical Games YouTube channel about it. It was awesome. Winter's Rime. This is in the middle of the pandemic craziness, and I was just trying to keep my mind occupied, so I was starting new adventures all the time. So I was running Anarchy and Atroxia, Kingmaker Resistance, which we'll get to in a second, Winter's Rime, and Perfect Storm all at the same time, and I lost it. My brain broke. Winter's Rime was Rime of the Frost Maiden. We set it in the Frostmoor, which I didn't mention. That's where I ran the Withering, the Tomb of Annihilation. It was a jungle. But if you remember, the Ring of Winter featured in that adventure. And in my setting 500 years ago, the Ring of Winter, in the Withering adventure, just got destroyed, turned this entire jungle continent into a frozen wasteland. So when they start playing Rime of the Frost Maiden, they go to 10 towns and everything's frozen over. Pretty cool. So it's both Icewind Dale and Chult and my own setting nonsense on top, and that created the Frostmoor. And then we resurrect Resistance, Kingmaker. It's been a while since we played Kingmaker at this point, and I'm like, I need it back in my life. So we reconstructed a group. I went to the people I enjoyed playing with the most, and the people who had the most similar playstyle to me, who were also the most available, who would be prepared to put D&D front and center. And these were often people in other D&D groups, and they wanted to leave their group and join ours. They were excited to come play the game we were playing. So it kind of felt like a marriage, like a long-term commitment. And we were able to construct our group out of that, and it was lovely. And instead of setting it here, because one of the characters in the previous adventure has become Duke of Andrim, Oryx has become Duke of Andrim. It was the same player who played Acererak, Falhorn, right? So we decided, let's go somewhere else. So we went here to Drazak Dul, which was the land of the orcs. And one of the players was playing an orc who was supposed to inherit this city, but some stuff has been going wrong. He didn't. There's a whole bunch of things going on, and he ends up having to sort of fight for his inheritance as the whole duchy is splitting apart into rebellion and other factions vying for inheritance with his brothers. And at the same time, this is the Invincible Overlord's homeland, and he is invading up into Drazak Dul. So they're having to fight this land war as well. Lazarus, the character, Lazarus is dead, he's in hell. So Magnus wanted to play, and he played a different character, a character he'd introduced after Lazarus died. I apologize if you're getting, it's Magic the Gathering is on the screen here behind me. He went to hell, he went to a different plane, so he had to play a different character. And in the middle of Resistance, the party splits up, remember a video on that, and one group goes up here to these ruins of Vanagar, and get sent by the Overlord's wizard Mortem into the Frostmoor. And if you're thinking, this is just a bunch of stuff from other people, especially Matt Colwell, you're right. Especially at this point, I was running very much just whatever stuff I thought was cool, and a lot of times that was some other creator's stuff. That's not something I do today, now that I'm also creating stuff on YouTube. I want to make my own stuff, and that way I could share it with people. But I was running a game for myself and for my players, and at that point, when you're doing that, you have no obligation to make your stuff be 100% unique or original. If you see me say something in a video and I'm talking about, I did this and that, and I mentioned some name you like the thought of or whatever, just steal it and put it in front of your players. That's what I do. I'd done ages of it. And I was just remixing. It's basically like elaborate fan fiction. Like, I really liked the chain, and then they weren't playing anymore because of, reasonable reasons, COVID or whatever. And I thought, well, I want to know what happens next with the Overlord. I'm just going to run that. Anyway, they go here, they get sent to the Frostmoor. And because that time I was running a bunch of adventures at the same time broke my brain, I had killed the adventure that was happening at the Frostmoor. If we go back to the spreadsheet, you'll see Winter's Rime only lasted for 8 sessions. But one of the players in that adventure was awesome to play with. Our resistance group was 5 players, so I figured I'll just invite her to play along for a bit and see how she gels with the others. And she gelled really well. Like, it was an easy fit. So that was our friend Anna, not AB, Anna, different, there are 2 Annas. And she came along and she played a whole bunch of... she played a few sessions with us in Resistance, and eventually just became sort of a main member of the group and continued to play with us afterwards, and it was awesome. Then there's a bunch of short adventures in between. Artie Saves Midwinter was a winter one-shot where a whole bunch of elves at the dawn of time... Hang on, here it is. Several thousand years in the past. They all come together and they meet this little boy who's going to save Midwinter. Here's the character layout for that. They could pick any one of these Eladrin or the Shatterkai or this little 10-year-old boy named Artie. 12-year-old boy. Then there was an adventure called Adventurer Killers, where a whole bunch of monsters escaped from a local dungeon and were going to kill a whole bunch of PCs. Or they were actually like iconic NPCs. And we made this lineup of people to choose from. You could be a cranium rat, a Modron, a Gnoll, a Darrow, an Ogre, a White. There was also Science in the Sunstorm. I have my own sort of version of Dark Sun that I just put in my world. All of it. Here it is. And I wanted to run something there, so we just went, here, pick one of these guys to play. And we thought, that's fucking cool, let's do that. Northmount Conundrums. Magnus liked the idea that there was a wizard school. I'd run that one-shot in it, and then the Candlekeep Mysteries book came out, and he figured, I'll just run these as one-shots in that wizarding school, and we'll do it whenever we have time. And that was fun. We still do one every now and again. It's technically on hold, it's not done, but it's gotten really far between sessions. I think we're sort of cooled on the idea, but we're probably going to do one eventually. He also did the Amen, which was technically canon, sort of. It was basically a pastiche of the A-Team, but it was a bunch of holy scholars fighting like Demogorgon and stuff, but it was actually a novel in my world that exists. So every now and again we reference those novel and those characters in that novel so that they can be canon, even though they definitely did not happen. Then we went back to Westwood. We ran another adventure in the Westwood. This one featured a whole town of undead who were all sapient. What is the morality of that? How does that work? We don't know. Victor liked the idea that he could run adventures as the Overlord soldiers looking for different weapons out there. Different sort of secret weapons, like the Nazis in Indiana Jones are always trying to find some occult material. And we played the Warbreed, the Overlord soldiers. And that was a one-shot. Good fun. In the Smoke, we went back to Blackguard for this one, and it was somebody got killed, somebody who had invented a petroleum furnace, and everyone was fighting over the patent. And we got introduced to a character called Rollo Demelius, who we had a lot of fun playing with. And in the end of the adventure, I sort of told him, I want you to do a few sessions in Kingmaker just to have you play with him a little bit. And he did. He joined us, and it was a lot of fun. So we just sort of had him stuck around like we did with Anna, and now we were up to 7 players in that group. And he had a more difficult time gelling in with the rest of the group than Anna did. In particular, he didn't like many of the sort of domain management or battles or that kind of stuff. He just liked to roleplay a bunch, and Kingmaker was very heavy roleplay, so he was getting like half of a deal out of it. But he joined us for the rest of the campaign, and it was a lot of fun. Friedrich, my boss at work, who'd been playing with us a bunch, wanted to run Out of the Abyss, and we sort of helped him set it up and helped him figure out a bunch of the details, and he then set it in Oruson, and we'd sort of give him little hooks and things. This adventure, they ran 18 sessions before it sort of fell apart on account of some of the players deciding to make babies, which made things very difficult. Well, Iron Circle and the Mountaineers. I wanted to run another Iron Circle session, but I felt like the story was done. So I decided to run a story about the B team in the Exterior Isles. I went up here, ran an adventure up here. And at this point, we bounced around enough that we sort of feel like we understand Oruson. There was a long period in Phase 2 where it was just these little vignettes, little points of light that we'd sort of get to know a little bit of. But at this point, it felt like a full, complete setting. We ran an adventure there. It was 4 sessions and featured on the minor team. Gwisted ran a one-shot. Gwisted, the player for Rolo, he ran a one-shot called Weed Killers. It wasn't supposed to be a one-shot, but we never went back to it. There was some misconnect there. Pale in the Moonlight. This was a hugely important side adventure we ran. It was Wild Beyond the Witchlight, but Tasha in my world was called the Pale Knight when we ran Artie Saves Midwinter, and she and Anna's patron from the player who joined in Winter's Rime came to Resistance. Her patron was also called the Pale Knight, and she thought her patron was Tasha. But in actual fact, the Pale Knight is a title that Tasha absorbed out of somebody else, someone called Lutheria. This, if you've played Odyssey of the Dragon Lords, you know where this is going, but we'll get there in a second. Then we played Kingmaker World at War. Now, the Resistance was the story of how Kor, the new player who joined this adventure, became Duke of Drozic Duel. World at War is how that escalated into a full-on campaign across the world. At this point, the players had teleport, they had ships, they could go anywhere fairly easily, and they meet with the allied forces who are telling them, hey, listen, we are facing a cataclysmic threat in Mytol, Waterdeep, and Kalia City. One of those, if not 2 or 3, are going to fall in the next few weeks. Can you stop one of them from falling? And the players say, we're going to stop all of them from falling. And they did. They split the party. They went to all these different locations, did a whole bunch of adventures at the same time. And we ran, I think, like 12 or 15 sessions where the groups were never all together. Some of it was kind of rough, but a lot of it was really epic. And they were communicating by ascending, so I had to cut really cleverly. I got quite good at running multiple parties at the same time, at the same session. Occasionally, I'd run them as separate sessions, but sometimes I just had them together. You can do a mix of the two. You can do one or the other. At this point, they sort of go to all these places, and by the end of it, they sail their collected units into Mytol, the last city, the city they left for last, and they fight a big battle against the Overlord's forces. And when that battle was complete, they dealt a massive blow, and then this part of the campaign was over. We were going to get back to it later. But while that was going on across 2020, we ran a whole bunch of other stuff. Ivar ran a one-shot where we all played Crooks. It was like Ocean's 11, but Terrantell's 7. Magnus ran like a Hateful Eight session called Sir Atreus Hate. These two sort of pastiches were both done in a cabin, but they were actually quite serious, and both of them were really good. Sir Atreus Hate kind of excelled just on account of the fact that the roleplay in that was really magnificent. We were all these kind of different people who were vying for control of the Axe of the Dwarvish Lords. If you want the full story on that, go check out the Dungeon Master's Guide review I did. I ran Strixhaven for 5 sessions, technically not in Norathon. I was just in love with the idea of there being a blood age, which is back when war existed, and now they live in this post-war utopia. I thought it was fascinating. But that didn't really go anywhere. We just ran the first chapter, I think the first 4 sessions or whatever it was. There was like 4 chapters in the book. We ran the first one. We thought it was good. We were like, maybe we'll get back to this. We haven't. Perfect Storm in Freeport. This was a continuation of the previous Perfect Storm stuff that had happened here in the Southern Blue. But now we were doing the rest of it in Freeport, and this was kind of the finale to that adventure. At this point, the Magnus and I, we used to be sitting next to each other at work, so whenever we were in between tasks, we'd have a little conversation about D&D. But things got shuffled around at the office, and suddenly we weren't sitting next to each other, we weren't spending as much time together, and it got more and more difficult for us to prepare as co-DMs, which is what we were doing. We were co-DMing. So that adventure kind of had to just become one of ours to run. And I ended up giving it to him because I was running Kingmaker World at War, and that was just taking up all my time prepping for that. So he brought it to what I thought was a pretty damn satisfying conclusion, with time travel and multiple events happening at the same time. There was a time dragon in it, and Vecna and Vecna's agent showed up. One of the agents was a pirate who had the Emerald Eye, which was a player character who got it, who went and stole the Emerald Eye during the Pirates of the Midsea. And the other one had Hand of Vecna, which he got from killing Archon the Black in Rise and Descent. And the two of those characters then met and were fighting over who could get to keep the other item so that they become the Avatar of Vecna. I thought it was really awesome. And I was largely just a player during that. There was a Bronze Dragon ally they made, and he was just like, he just let me play him. And I was just that Bronze Dragon for the rest of the adventure. Another cowboy adventure, this one's called Ariston Trail. Obviously a nod to the Oregon Trail, and it was the It was set in the distant past when these railroads that are here, this dashed line, when that was being built. And it featured the Emperor from all the way back in Kingmaker Interregnum, who we learned had been casting Magic Jar on himself, which is something the player talked to me when that adventure ended. And he was trying to get back this artifact he had, the Shadow Staff, which was a Pathfinder magic item. And then I did a big mistake. I thought, that Iron Circle stuff? The ones I was saying I thought were pretty good and we didn't need a sequel to. I thought, let's run a sequel to it. And I set it in the multiverse. I set it in Quintessence, and I wanted to run Elemental Planes and, these legendary mythic elemental characters and stuff like that. And it just collapsed. Like, it wasn't fun. And the scheduling was a mess, and it was very hack and slashy, and the story was just piss poor. And it really didn't go anywhere. That just happens. Like, there's very little you can do about that. That's just a part of running the game sometimes. Victor ran another one-shot. This one, we were searching for the Valley of Long Spells. Sometimes I get confused on spell durations, and we just run with it. And nobody clocks it or whatever, and then later on we learn, fly doesn't last for an hour, it's 10 minutes. So we decided that had something to do with weave, moving across the plane or whatever, and he said, what if there's this place where it's, where the magic lasts long, and he wanted to run a one-shot about that premise. And it was fun. Eva ran another one of those heist adventures. This one was a sequel to Tarantel 7, and then later on he'd run another sequel to it called Oryx's 8, but we'll get there. I ran the GSS Centurion. We called it Expedition to Barrier Peaks because it was sort of an homage to that adventure, but it really doesn't contain anything from it. We now call it the GSS Centurion, and it's available on the Patreon for adepts if you want to run it. It's a big spaceship full of monsters, and it's a lot of fun. It's very, very retro-futuristic, and you should listen to War of the World soundtrack while playing it. 2023 started off with Magnus running the Black Blade Butcher, which was kind of a spiritual successor to the murder mystery, everybody wants the same magic item from Atrus Hate. But we filmed it. We set up a bunch of cameras. We set up 5 cameras to go film it. We got people sitting around tables, and we did like an actual play out of it. And there was some faults with the cameras, and the audio wasn't that good. We were having a whole bunch of issues. So we just put it in a drawer, and we never used it. And it was my first foray into making D&D content, and just absolutely failed. We still have the audio somewhere, and I might at some point turn it into a podcast if I find the time, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Victor ran a one-shot where we all played gnomes falling through the sky. He called it Gnome Man's Sky. It was PvP. Gnomes were fighting each other. The premise was thin, but the fun was high. And now we're getting to the end of Phase 3 here. We start the Last War. And this, I knew, so over the course of Kingmaker, we'd been playing for so many years, and I knew there was no way we were going to bring it to a satisfying end. There was no way I was going to be able to take all the plot elements and satisfyingly tie them together over the course of 30 sessions or something, unless we did it episodic. So I said, okay, we're going to do the next session episodic. Let's play Microscope. A Microscope is a game where you collaboratively world build, and you lay out these cards. On the top, you've got eras, and then you've got events in them. And I laid out the invasion of Mytol as a military success for the Kingmakers. That's the one I mentioned in the World War. And at the end, I put down, Pearl receives a message from Aneros. Before he dies, the Overlord opens the glacier. And that was the end. And I said, what happens in between? And then we all went around creating events or eras and just telling each other what went down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we created this war, this period of 3 years with a whole bunch of crazy events in it. And we figured out, what are the beats, what are the story sections that need to happen. Whenever somebody suggested something, and normally in Microscope you just put down a thing, and now it's true. But we had a discussion every time, and we talked about, what is it about. And sometimes somebody would say something, and I'd say, I don't think you can do that. I think that's an adventure. And I would create a red card, Kingmaker's fight against Tiamat, with a question mark on it. And that way we'd sort of put in adventures, like this one. This one here is the most updated one. You can see the question. This one's a white circle, meaning it's a light era, because they won. This one used to be a question mark, and is now an empty circle, because they won, right? So it was my job during these adventures to make sure the premise wasn't will the players all die, because we know we want them all to be there fighting the bad guy at the end. So we had to figure out what else could go wrong. And that was my job, to set the stakes. And then we played these episodic adventures. There were a few sessions each. Some of them 1 session, some of them were 5. And we'd sort of set the stakes, and then we play through a whole adventure, and then just cut, and then be like, it's several months later, and now this is happening in the war. And the whole war becomes this sort of nebulous, ongoing event that we already have vague understanding of. And this was very important, because it allowed me to wrap a bunch of plot threads. It allowed me to tell the players outright, these plot threads we set up, I am not wrapping up. I am leaving them for future campaigns. And third, there's now a nebulous era for me to world build on top of. The Last War now exists as this sort of idea. While we were playing that, other adventures were being played. We played the Treadway Case, which was a sequel to the other Dead in the Smoke adventure. This one was a murder mystery in Atroxia. The government, it turns out, was building a machine that could read thoughts and control brainwaves. And they were doing it by experimenting on homeless people and like cutting them up and doing body experiments on them and then dissections and stuff like that. And then they'd throw them out in the street and make it look like it was a serial killer. And the Atroxians had been the sort of good guys up until this point. They'd been sort of nebulous. They're doing a bit of colonialism. That's not good. They're doing a bit of empire building. That's not good. But, as far as the gradient from evil to good in this setting goes, it's somewhat grim dark in that way. They were all right. They were acceptably evil to a certain degree because the other ones are the fucking worst, right? And these guys were just kind of regular nationalistic empire gross. But then they do this, and suddenly everyone's going, no, they're just up, right? They're just fucked up. We went to Cabot again. I ran another Westwood adventure. This one's set during a secession war. The South, Southern Ariston, secedes from the Empire, and Blackmore, by the way, in Sir Atreus' Hate, seceded, and the Freefolk Isles used the opportunity to secede, and Tradia got conquered by the Overlord. So at this point, the Empire's collapsing. It is absolutely collapsing. And when the South secedes, I ran a cowboy adventure set here around the border. The fact that the South seceded was something that came up in the microscope, and then I ran adventures around it. It was a lot of fun. Even ran this Dreadful Days in Drumanach, which is here in Riverfell. He was like, we've never been to Riverfell. I'm going to go make something there. And I was like, awesome. And he ran a little adventure here. A couple of sessions. There were zombies, and we lost. The zombies took Drumanach. And now this one here technically belongs to Phase 4, I'd say. It didn't start there, but I'm going to say it technically belongs in Phase 4. This is Odyssey of the Dragon Lords. Now, I mentioned them earlier. Odyssey of the Dragon Lords is a book that is a supplement for 5th edition, produced not by Wizards of the Coast, produced by Modiphius. This is the cover. It's all sort of Greek fantasy with dragons and epic mythology. And Lutheria is one of the main villains. She's the Lady of Dreams. Oh, look at that. Somebody made fan art of her? That's awesome. She's the Lady of Dreams and Queen of Fae. And she was the first Pale Knight. And we started learning about her while we hadn't fought her. Like, we fought her in her final form as the Pale Knight in the last war, when she comes back as a vestige of her former self, having been killed by some heroes called the Kalei, the Chosen. And then we played through that adventure. And just a few days ago, we killed her for real. And it was, her original form. And it was kind of bittersweet, because we knew that she was now gone from the story, because we'd killed her now, and we know she dies in the future. And theoretically, we could run something in between, but also the drama's all gone out of it at the moment. But also, we killed her knowing she comes back, but knowing that she's gone, it was kind of like when you finish watching the episode 3 of Star Wars, and you're like, well, that wasn't the end. Now I got to go watch episode 4. I ran for AB. I told her I wanted to run a solo adventure for her, so I ran this adventure which just her and me. And I wanted to set it in Riverfell, because we'd never really set anything there except Drumanach. So she grew up in Lochhagan, she went to Lochmoten, and kind of became a local hero that ascended to becoming their Baron, and then eventually the Countess, and soon, probably the Duchess. We don't know yet, but I think so. And it's this continent here south of Andrum and Starion. It's got a lot to do with the Fae and with the Shadowfell. It's also set during the last war, so in the bit that we time skipped, we're now playing. And then we're sort of getting to world build parts of that war, but just for her. And she wasn't there when she wasn't in the group that played the last war. But she is in our current Kingmaker group, which I'll get to in a second. So I needed to make sure that she, as somebody who's joining the Kingmakers, had experience of the last war, the kind of stuff that happened in it. So I wanted to run that for her, set in that time period. And it's been a lot of fun. We play still like about twice a month. We don't play too much, just enough, because it's a lot of work prepping for just one person. So we try and play occasionally with the Feywild, Shadowfell, Last War, all these things sort of fighting at the same time. Oryx's 8 was an adventure where Oryx, the Duke of Andrum, sent a bunch of heroes into the Frostmoor to go look for a crystal dragon, because they just released crystal dragons, and they don't exist in Oruson. They'd never shown up there. So we wanted an excuse to put them in there, and Ivar said, what if I make an excuse? And he ran an adventure. That's a lot of the times other people run adventures in my setting. They're excited about something they saw in a supplement, either official or unofficial, and they said, can I put this in your setting? Let me run an adventure. When Magnus ran Freeport for the first time, he was like, I want to put Carcosa and the Yellow King in your setting. I was like, all right, cool. Awesome. Pop off. And then we ran a mega game. My voice is almost gone, but I'm going to keep talking. A mega game is like, it's like a LARP and D&D at the same time. It's like huge. This one had like 25 players in it, and it's set during the last war. It's this kind of massive conflict between these corporations. Dredge, the guy who started the last war on behalf of the Atroxians, gets decapitated by the dwarves who were in open revolt. Remember, they seceded. Gets decapitated. His government falls, and the emperor has to summon all the political council and be like, let's figure out who's in charge now. Let's lead the war while we're being attacked by the south. And I played the emperor in that, and I was basically a bad guy, but the players didn't really know that because I was just the DM. But the DM plays the bad guys. And over the course of that mega game, over the course of 8 hours, the Emperor kept getting richer and more powerful with better allies. And by the end, the Emperor dissolved the government and took over as an autocrat. But they'll get their comeuppance. They get to beat the Emperor later. Just a few left. The Last Marches was Mikey's one-shot as the end of the West Marches adventure that we started all the way back here. And we went through the Tomb of Horrors, and it was awesome. Nathaniel's 9 was an adventure where it was another one of Ivar's sort of heist adventures where we were sent out into space, into the flow, where all the multiverses are, to go find Bahamut. Because Bahamut doesn't exist in Oruson, and we wanted to know why. So we were, following this hunch from this crystal dragon we found. We're going to go out into the flow, and we discovered that Bahamut has been killed and is being turned into a major dragon beast by the Mind Flayer colony, called the Exalted Cerebrum, which is some kind of external multiversal Mind Flayer empire, ? Ugh. And now we're into the fully sort of post-Last War adventures. The Dead in the Smoke, these two Dead in the Smoke adventures are one in Southern Ariston, which seceded, and one in Blackguard, and they're kind of dealing with the aftermath of what happened after the last war and the empire split. The Mordo case follows in the south. It takes place in this city here called Redyard, where we discover that there is basically police brutality and all kinds of injustices are going on, and their sort of quest for freedom seem to apply more to some people than other people. Meanwhile, in Blackguard, the Emperor's freshly built control of the city collapses just a year after the war, because of his abuses of power kind of end up getting the better of him, and his alliance with the wizards becomes his downfall when the wizards go do a bunch of heinous crimes like casting meteor shower on protesters. And now we're sort of getting into the more kind of modern politics era of Oruson, where the kind of stuff we're dealing with is often the kind of stuff that is happening all over the real world at the moment. In Kingmaker Everlasting, we're not going to talk too much about here. Now we're fully sort of into phase 4 at this point, following the aftermath of the war. Kingmaker Everlasting is set in the year 1450, so that's 27 years after the last war. And the players there are exploring Loggers County, which is up here. This is Blackguard. They're up here in Cross Keys and Roachport and exploring Loggers County. We ran another Wild Westwood. This one's set further south. We ran another sort of murder mystery called Lost in Splendor, which is basically the same but in Waterdeep and dealing with post-war Waterdavian politics. And over the course of phase 4, I imagine I'm going to run more sort of post-war stuff. How's the world reeling from the last war? How's it dealing with everything that happened? But I also think I'm going to run more stuff set in the distant past or the future or something. I want to know, what the Age of War and the Age of Peace were like. I want to know about the Age of Ruin. And I think I'm going to try doing those things in other systems. Maybe not. Maybe I'll end up running them in 5e. But if I find the time to go read some of the new systems I bought, I will be running them in those systems. And I'm excited about that. Anyway, that was a brief rundown of the 70 to 90 campaigns I run in Oruson and in the multiverse that surrounds it. People ask me a lot of times, why I don't talk more about my campaign setting, and I really don't know how to talk about it without talking about all of it, the whole thing, because it's not one theme or one idea. It's 50 themes, 50 ideas, and they're all kind of interconnected and bouncing around, and they're all about these connecting bits and texture. These adventures we run, they inform other adventures. They become parts of the story. This thing with a pale knight, that thing is like a microcosm of the kind of stuff we get up to, the continuity that we build over the course of these adventures. As the players go from place to place, they learn all these kinds of crazy things. How A connects to B, connects to C, and the way those settings inside my campaign world all talk to each other, how they're all, engaged in the same sort of truths. Even if I now go run an adventure in the Castarian Isles or in the Sunstorm, like my Dark Sun area, or the Southern Isles, which is like a whole tropic island chain, they're all going to be defined by the last war. They're all going to be defined by the conflicts that led up to it, and that's how they feel like a part of the same world, even if they're not necessarily the same settings. And if you want to know more about just sort of the inside straight dope of what it is that I do, why I run campaigns the way I run them. I'll be posting more Daði's Diaries videos on the Patreon. They'll be available for Mystic Apprentice tiers, and I'll try and do them twice a month. I think that's sort of the plan. The first few we'll just use to catch people up on the various stuff that's happened. And then eventually we'll just go into sharing my campaign notes and talking about what I did in a specific campaign or why I did things the way I did them. And if you have questions about everything I just talked about, I'm certain we'll do a Q&A on this spreadsheet, so leave them in the comments. Anyway, that's all for now. Until next time, keep studying the mystic arts.